J. Sai Deepak does not require any introduction. He is such a well-known author and lawyer. He is an engineer turned litigator, practicing as an arguing counsel before the High Court of Delhi and the Supreme Court of India. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Anna University and a bachelor's degree in law from IIT Kharagpur. From July 2009 until June 2016, he was a litigator at the NCR-based firm Sai Krishna and Associates. He was an associate partner of the firm when he quit in June 2016 to set up an independent practice as an arguing counsel. Civil commercial litigation, constitutional law, and competition law are his primary areas of practice. Since 2010, he has been writing intermittently on the blog The Demanding Mistress on civil commercial litigation. He has two wonderful books on decoloniality. Many of us have no introduction about these two books, India, that is Bharat, and India, Bharat, and Pakistan. Today, he would talk about Republic at 75, four pillars of Indian democracy. The talk will be of 15 to 20 minutes, I suppose, and then the floor will be open for interaction with the speaker and audience. Using cricketing parlance, batsman's bat always speaks for him. So, without saying anything, I would leave the quote to Mr. J. Sai Deepak on the topic Republic at 75, four pillars of Indian democracy. J. Sai Deepak, sir.
Namaste, good evening. Before I proceed with the topic, let me do some self-advertisement. You can come for my book signing at 6:30, and that is at stall C6. This was meant to be a panel discussion, so I was hoping for some sparring here with people who don't share my views, and was hoping to get some disagreements out in the public domain. But unfortunately, you'll have to suffer my monologue. So what we'll do is that we'll convert this into an interaction. So I'll take about 10 minutes at best to present my opening submission in that case, and we'll leave it to the audience to come after me with questions. My positions on the subject of the Constitution, I think, are fairly out in the open. Let me see if there is a new way of presenting what I've already presented in the past. So there are four pillars here, which have been mentioned as the pillars of the Constitution or of the Republic: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. In my view, they are not the pillars of the Constitution. And I don't believe they represent the pillars of constitutional thought. At least not from an Indic perspective. And I certainly don't think they capture the essence of what we stand or what we represent. If I have to do a panoramic survey of the last 75 years of the Indian Republic, I would proceed to make the statement that it has been a republic under a deep slumber, in a state of deep slumber, which has gradually started awakening only post 91-92. Some of the questions that we seem to be asking in the 2000s should have been asked much earlier, and the only reason we couldn't ask was because of our economic handicap. Questions of culture assume importance after a civilization or a society reaches a certain degree of economic sufficiency. Until then, culture takes a backseat. That doesn't mean that culture is not important, but you can't hope to discuss civilization, religion, culture, religion, so on and so forth, as long as the stomach is empty and hungry. So, usually when people approach economics and culture, or constitution for that matter, they approach the subject as if it is divided in watertight compartments, as if they are divided in silos. They are walled gardens which have nothing to do with each other. The fact of the matter is, whether it is civilization, culture, or economics, they evolve with time significantly, and each of them informs the other. This generation is capable of asking questions with respect to how Indian history or Bharatiya history has been written. One, of course, because it has access to alternative voices which it did not have hitherto, but also because, notwithstanding a lot of work that needs to be done on the economic front, we are nowhere as poor as we were in 1940s, 50s or 60s, or the self-imposed handicaps of the 70s and the 80s. Therefore, today we have the ability to start asking those questions. When you start looking at a society that is producing fantastic names in sports, in science and whatnot, it starts asking those questions or brings the very same confidence to the all-important realm of culture. So I see this as what we call in the lawyers' parlance a crawling effect or a domino effect, where economic confidence translates to cultural confidence at some stage. When you were a poorer nation, you felt the need to speak in English and dress up in the Englishman's attire. But as you have progressed and as you have done better for yourself, you have started sporting symbols of your cultural identity and markers even on international stage. And that, I think, is the clear and stark relationship between economics and culture. Now, is constitution completely an academic subject which has got nothing to do with this? I think what we did is that we signed up for a stopgap arrangement in the 1950s, between 1947 and 1950. Because the idea of constitutionalism as understood in a European sense was relatively new to us. And since we wanted to preserve the nation state of India as much as possible, the idea was to put faith in an apparatus that keeps that entity together. So the hope is that this document captures us in the broadest possible sense, and it helps us keep this edifice alive. But with time, questions have started emerging, even with respect to the origins of the constitution, whether it has an Indian origin or whether it has been imported from elsewhere. Most students of law, especially constitutional law, will tell you very clearly that notwithstanding the effort that has come from the members of the drafting committee of the constitution, there is a significant degree of identity between the 1935 Government of India Act and the Constitution of 1950. You just have to look for provision to provision, language to language, it will be identical. It won't be largely different. So if the Government of India Act of 1935 was not a product of an Indian mind or an Indian thought process, and the Constitution of 1950 is similar or identical in several parts to the Government of India Act of 1935, what makes the Constitution of India an Indian document? You don't need to understand constitution to make this point. You only need to understand logic to understand this point. A document that existed 15 years before the Constitution of 1950 has significant portions which is identical to the Indian Constitution of 1950. Then what is so original, different and Indian about the Constitution of 1950 is the question that you need to ask. Why is that question important? Because as long as you look to the Constitution for guidance, and that particular document is representative of the thought process of the colonizer, you're looking to the thought process of the colonizer in retrospect for guidance to the future. Now, does it mean that all parts of the Constitution are bad? All parts of the Constitution which represents the colonizer's thought are bad? No. Those aspects which deal with administrative detail and which have perhaps withstood the test of time can continue, with the all-important caveat that the system of bureaucracy that you inherited from the colonizer was meant for a top-down imposition of rule of law, wherein he sees you as a culture that constantly needs civilizing through the colonizer's lens. He sees you as a bunch of savages who needs the stick to be wielded in order for you to fall in line and for you to observe the rule of law. If that very same administrative apparatus with that kind of mindset continues post 75 years of independence, it speaks volumes of a lack of confidence, in my opinion, or lack of originality. In either case, the net result will be the same. Second, so one part of the Constitution that deals with administration perhaps can be retained in parts and can be revisited in part. But that part of the Constitution that is proven to be the most contentious part of the document has been those portions that relate to the identity of Bharat. religion, nationality, citizenship, language, minority rights. These are the aspects that have proven to be minefields and battlegrounds in the last 75 years. Unfortunately, it is my view that the document has not provided answers. If anything, it has thrown up more questions and has resulted in more division as far as national identity is concerned. I am comfortable subscribing to the notion of constitutionalism to say that there must be a document which provides us with a degree of guidance as to how we must conduct ourselves as a nation. But what must be contained in the document must be a product of our thought. So strike a distinction between constitutionalism and constitution as a document. Constitutionalism is a concept, it is a principle. Constitution is the document itself. I am perfectly comfortable subscribing to the notion of constitutionalism. I am perfectly comfortable subscribing to the notion of democracy, rule of law. However, what must the document be populated with in terms of content for it to reflect who we are? That is where the disagreement is. So an argument against the Constitution or certain portions of the Constitution is my exercise of my right to free speech. But that does not translate to my opposition to the concept of constitutionalism itself. Second, the reason we celebrate democracy, constitutionalism, so on and so forth, is because significantly, of course, it has its own value, but also because we are not asking the fundamental question, why democracy? This is a provocative line of thought, sure. Democracy has not been in existence for more than 500 to 600 years. That is the maximum age of this particular concept, the way we understand it today. And if anything, before the Cold War and post the Cold War, the chinks in the democratic armor have been there for all to see. Whether this is the best possible system, we still don't know. So a system that is less than 500 years old, which has not managed to prove its efficacy, even in the 75 years of its existence in Bharat, what is the point of celebrating and deifying that particular system? Are we so sure that democracy is also the way of the future? We have no guarantee of it. Because on the one hand, how democratic values can be used to subvert democracy, Europe is a standing example to it as on date. And if someone wants to tell me that democracy is the only way that people can achieve prosperity, well, China stands a testament to the contrary. In between, you have the Singaporean style of democracy, which combines certain aspects of the Chinese mindset and certain aspects of European institutionalization of democratic principles. What is Bharat's contribution to this pool of thought on what must be the way that we must govern ourselves as a people? I don't have an answer to that, but let me start with a few tentative positions on this. One, to assume that a single model of administration and governance is applicable to the whole world is a fundamentally anti-democratic position to take. That position lacks diversity. This position lacks cultural diversity. That position lacks an understanding of history. This position lacks an understanding of the evolution of societies and races across the world because the pace and the values are not the same. So once you agree that one size doesn't fit all and you can't cut the head to fit the hat, then the possibilities open up. That's point number one. Two, for at least 60, 70 years, one particular country has tried to export democracy through anti-democratic means or undemocratic means, using war as the opening option or trade as an opening option, or of course in the recent past it's been using NGOs across the world. Unfortunately, the tap has been cut off yesterday or today. USAID has been shut. Now let's see how long that particular stream runs. Nothing democratic has come out of that particular exercise to export democracy. If anything, it has only led to anarchy. And those regions, this exercise or this experiment has been let's say, or it's been subjected to, it's been left in a situation where it is worse off than it was before the democratic exercise. You go and ask the person living in those parts of the world where this exercise has been conducted, what do you want? The peace of the past with a certain degree of restriction, or the freedom of the present with hunger? His answer will be crystal clear. I am not saying that our choices are in this binary. I'm just saying that when you try to impose one particular model and one particular worldview on the entire world, it's not possible. And if there is one part of the world which represents the diversity of the world, it has to be Bharat and no other place. Because the sheer diversity of it and the sheer depth of each identity tells you that this is in fact a subcontinent that masquerades as a country, that passes off as a country. And if this particular nation state after 1947 has managed to stay together as a single political unit, and if someone tells me the reason for that has to be the document called Constitution, then I have to say you understand very little about the Constitution and you underestimate your own propensity for peace as a culture and as a society. That document is there to tell you how to conduct yourself, but the document in itself cannot inspire loyalty or allegiance. It has to go beyond that, it has to go deeper than that. I've given this example in the past. Let me see how this example works here. I'm sure most people in the audience have visited Chandni Chowk at some point or the other. What do you think must be the floating population of Chandni Chowk on any given day? At any given point of time, it's anywhere between 1 lakh to 3 lakhs at the very least, conservatively speaking, right? If somebody decided, or if 10 people decided to pack homemade explosives in satchels, 15 people disperse themselves in that crowd. Do you really think you have the wherewithal to control it there? If committed people decide to do it on a daily basis, take any other part of the country, not just Chandni Chowk, any place which has a floating population of over, let's say, anywhere between 1 to 5 lakhs. You do not have the intelligence for it. You do not have the police personnel for it. You do not have the security resources to address it. What explains the by and large peaceful, let's say, existence of this country? Not the document called the Constitution. There is an innate barometer which we constantly berate. There is an innate cultural barometer that pushes you towards peaceful existence as opposed to revolution. And that's one of the reasons that you have survived together as a country, notwithstanding the challenges to its integrity that we have faced since 1947 and continuing. Does the Constitution build on those innate strengths of Bharatiya, let's say, Sanskriti and culture? That is where my answers are still open-ended, but I'm tilting towards the negative. To say the document does not build on the strengths of Bharat as a society and as a civilization. If anything, it looks at the strengths of Bharat civilization as problems to be weeded out in the name of reform. And therefore, it still takes forward the view of the colonizer, except now it is done by the Brown Sahib as opposed to the Gora Sahib, period. Now, if you really want proof of this, the shortest possible answer is read my books. But the longer answer, or perhaps the more detailed answer, is Constitution and education almost go hand in hand. If your education system believes that the best form of education or the most sophisticated form of education can be achieved only through English as a medium of instruction, tell me it has not taken the vision of the colonizer. Can I confidently argue before the highest constitutional court of this land in a language other than English? We have had instances where the highest court of this country has shot down on consuls who have tried to submit in Hindi, for God's sakes, not even in Tamil or let's say Malayalam. Which is why I say that you don't need to get into extensive constitutional study to understand this point, because the anecdotal examples are right in front of your eyes everywhere. I'm perfectly comfortable learning English, perhaps as a language or even as, I'm not sure it should be taught as a medium of instruction or used as a medium of instruction, because it has serious impact on cognitive abilities and the way you understand things. There is a fantastic thesis, I still don't know if it's achieved any kind of traction. It's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, where it says that people learn better when they understand and learn stuff through their native tongues as opposed to alien tongues. Perhaps that explains why, notwithstanding their poor knowledge of English, China is doing better in innovation, Japan is doing better in innovation, Israel is doing better in innovation. The counter to that could be people telling me that, they have a largely homogeneous society when it comes to language. There's no point in comparing an Israel with India, or a China with India, or a Japan with India, or even a Korea with India. I said, you're right. In which case you compare India with Europe, which is to say that massive continent, which is almost 3 times the size of India, has managed to retain its cultural diversity and also its pan-European identity significantly. So if you want to understand Bharat, you see this as an Asian reflection or a counterpart of Europe when it comes to diversity. But the best part is, we have not suffered the language wars that Europe has. We have not suffered the sectarian wars that Europe has, which means the unity or intra-Bharatiya unity is stronger than intra-European unity, and therefore we have poorly understood Bharat when it comes to the issue of unity. We are not being kept together by the constitution, we are being kept together by Sanskriti. There I've dropped the word. And therefore, if you're seriously interested in perhaps having the best practices from the rest of the world in terms of governance and also retaining what is yours, certainly subscribe to constitutionalism, but ensure that the constitution as a document, the contents of it, reflect the essence of your civilization and not alien thought. Certainly go back to the Upanishadic principle that please be open to the best of ideas wherever they come from. Sure. But most people don't realize you start looking for ideas outside only when you realize that you don't have ideas within. So far, we have not undertaken that first inquiry and we have not embarked upon the first inquiry asking ourselves, does Bharat as a civilization have something to offer to the contemporary world, to all these issues and challenges that we face, from democracy to economics to culture to climate change to diversity to gender, jati, caste, whatever it may be. We have not asked those questions. We are barely scratching the surface. And the reality of the situation is we feel slightly more confident of our civilization when we see a white man imitate our civilization. I don't see why do we need to take pride in the Mahakumbh when we see foreigners coming to Mahakumbh. Why do you need a Julia Roberts to practice Hinduism to understand the value of your faith system or your Sanskriti for that matter? That is a broader reflection from the pop discourse or the cultural, let's say, milieu of where the problem is. And I'm trying to say that sense of latent, dormant, but ever-present inferiority complex is equally present in the constitutional discourse. So do not approach this issue or the subject from an academic lens. It has a tangible impact. Don't worship the document, understand the document, learn to critique the document, and look for its weaknesses and strengths both. I am not here to pillory the document in its entirety. I just can't accept it lock, stock, and barrel. That I will not be able to do with my rational mind still fully functioning. I can't do that. So while I can sit and spout values here, liberty, fraternity, equality, whatever, I will be presenting a regurgitation of the French Revolution and the Enlightenment here. I wouldn't be talking about what is Bharatiya Enlightenment. It makes very little sense to spout and spew those values, or to look for our values which are counterparts of those values. Because those values may still exist with us, but our priorities may be different. So my suggestion is, it's a takeaway, just consider this. Don't agree with anything that I've said. Similarly, don't agree with everything that the Constitution says. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, Q&A please.
So the floor is open for, you will take a couple of questions from you.
So the mic needs to be passed around, I guess. I'll just give it.
So why do you think that colonizers gave us democracy and republic?
I'm so sorry, what?
How you think that colonizers give us the democracy? I don't think colonizers give us democracy. I don't think colonizer gave us republican system. Colonization happened, I think, 1400 something. At that time, even Europe don't have democracy. Even at that time, Europe don't have republic system. And when you says the constitution is foreign to us, then democracy, republic is also foreign to us.
So I'll answer this question differently. When someone wants to make the statement, and I've heard quite a few people in office make the statement that Bharat is the mother of democracy, it's the home of democracy and all that. I don't think even I can agree with that statement. That's too much of a statement to make. We don't need to make these kind of statements. There are better arguments to make. So the source of this statement is the stone inscription from Tamil Nadu called the Uttarameru inscription, which basically sets down a set of rules as to how can one occupy office, the concept of an election as opposed to an appointment to reach a particular office, what kind of conflicts of interest must one look for before he occupies that particular office, what are the rules of disqualification, these have existed. Strictly speaking, democracy as we understand it today is not how we have operated. We have actually operated in a slightly different way. Whenever history has discussed, or even for that matter, Itihasas have discussed the Vrishnis or the Yadavas, they've always called them confederacy because they're not strictly a monarchy in the way you understand it. And how these systems have typically functioned is that citizens have a voice in terms of the leading intellectuals as well as the money bags of the society having an opinion with respect to critical appointments. And therefore, their opinion would have a certain degree of value, it would have a certain degree of stakeholdership, but it would not be conclusive on that particular issue, unlike today. And therefore, the opinion being presented to the Raja for his consideration is for him to decide despite public opinion going against his position. But he would still have the freedom to take a position to the contrary. Two, you also have had the concept of a Paur Sabha, wherein citizens have a certain forum to ventilate their voices. So the seeds of democratic spirit are not in whether the public has a right to appoint someone, but whether the public has a say or a voice in a decision taken, at the very least to express its displeasure. So in several ways, you could also say that more than free speech, the better characterization is the right to dissent against the decision of the rule-making authority or power that characterizes the seed of democracy. So I may even go to the extent of saying that without dissent or the right to disagree, even if it doesn't translate to the power of veto, democracy is nothing. It means nothing. So to answer the question, one, whether we are the home to democracy, whether we need to subscribe to democracy is a second question, or a secondary question according to me. The larger question from a political science perspective that every student must ask himself or herself or themselves is, one, what is the best possible way of striking a balance between the needs of administration and the right to provide a space for voices? You need both. When administration becomes the pretext to clamp down on everything, then free speech takes a hit. But when free speech prevails over administration, then social order takes a hit, which leads to chaos. It's almost as good or as bad as saying that every twist and turn that a driver is supposed to take when he's behind the steering wheel will be dictated by the traffic light. And it's as bad as saying that there must be no concept of a traffic light altogether. You need some set of rights for the driver, but you also need the driver to subscribe to the traffic signal at some point where the red lines are very clear. Next. Yes.
Hello, sir. As you have just explained us about the ancient democracy like Videha, but we have seen like kingdoms like Haryanka kingdoms advanced to destroy the democracy of Haryanka and prevailed all over India, which tends to a bigger ancient India. We can say that it was more successful than a democracy.
Right.
So can we say that democracy sometimes make things get slower and sometimes tyranny or aristocracy, autocracy good. So, in the present context, do you think that democracy made in a little slower for its development?
You could say so, but there is also an alternate point of view. These questions have arisen only because of China's development significantly. Okay. Therefore, we can say that it's easier for the Chinese government to take a decision in the context of infrastructure. But when an Indian government, whether it's the state or the center, wants to take a decision, it gets mired in litigation. Fine. You should also ask the Chinese people whether they completely agree with the pace of the development that China undertook and its impact on nature. They paid the price for it equally. They paid the price for it equally because there was no citizen's voice stopping them from pursuing the goal of development in an unfettered fashion without any thought or heed paid to the concept of environmental balance. That is equally a reality. While you may have RA as an example, as a counterpoint here, But the other example is this too has happened. But let's swing back to your question and perhaps answer this question in your favor. When Chinese realize the impact of their pace of development on nature, they also have the immediate ability to take a decision to the contrary and address the problem quickly. So perhaps what is happening is, while we keep celebrating democracy, on the other hand, there is a silent frustration brewing at the pace at which democracy works and its inability to address the problem right here and right now, where the problem gets passed on like a legacy issue to subsequent generations. And it is only in a democracy one generation has the ability and the luxury of saying, this problem I won't handle, I'll pass it on as virasa to the next generation. That's what has been happening for 75 years in this country. So that disenchantment is equally there. Perhaps what we should do is you should try living in a non-democratic state as an experiment to see what are you okay with. Because right now the grass looks greener on the other side. Okay? And there is a decent chance that the Indian model may disprove the rest of us or the rest of the world, both in the pace of its development and its democracy. But there is one thing that is very, very crucial. To equate vibrance and noise with democracy is the lowest that you can do. To say that democracy translates to lack of order or lack of discipline is where there's a huge misunderstanding of democracy. Which is why, as opposed to all of the models, I would seriously want to see what can Bharat do to take a leaf out of the Singaporean experience and apply it to smaller units of its constituents. You don't need to equate the entirety of Bharat with the Singapore because that's not comparable. But what can you do at the municipal level to emulate the Singaporean model to improve the life of people at the ground level? Let me answer this question in a very mundane way. If by and large your roads are clean and your quality of life on a day-to-day basis is decent,
Yes, ma'am.
there's a decent chance that most people will not have any interest in the model that delivers the goods. And they will also not have an interest in higher orders of corruption. Because they will say, as far as my life is concerned, it is significantly untouched by sophisticated corruption. And I have managed to deliver the goods on the ground. Do I have a society or a model to exemplify this case study? United States. It's not as if they're not corrupt. What they do is that one, they have a smaller population and 3 times the size of Bharat. So it's easier for them to hide poverty to some extent. That's one. Second, they manage to get the basics right in terms of the immediate needs of the people. That leaves the super rich money bags to do what they want. Where they get to export democracy, export culture, export soft power and whatnot. Because the rest of the population really doesn't care after that. They really don't care. Which is why when you go and do a random survey of Americans on the street and find out how their GK is, it sucks because they have no interest in the rest of the world. They are being given the best of facilities according to them on the ground, so they don't care. Right? I really don't have an answer to the question except for saying the deification of the democratic model will see a real death in the near future, but that doesn't mean democracy will die. It just means that the contours of democracy will change. You may start looking at a democracy which has some elements of authoritarianism, which has some elements of an enlightened democracy. I'll give a simple example from what the British man wanted in Bharat. The Rajya Sabha was meant to be the place to control the Lok Sabha. The idea was to populate the Rajya Sabha in its earlier avatar with all the retired bureaucrats who represented the British Raj, and to pacify the people of India by saying, we have your people as representatives in the Lok Sabha, now keep your mouth shut. But whatever decisions would be taken by people in the Lok Sabha, there would be a veto waiting here. So that the mob doesn't take decisions with respect to sensitive policy aspects, and policy decisions are taken only by people who know the subject. Because democracy may throw up the most popular option, but may not always throw up the most qualified option. So it has become a game of popularity more than a game of qualification to an issue. Imagine someone talking about the nuclear codes, talking about geopolitics, talking about artificial intelligence. Do you really think democracy is capable of producing the best possible option to answer all these sensitive questions? You know the answer. You don't need to tell me because you'll be branded fascist if you give me the real answer. But if you know the limitations of democracy in addressing these sensitive issues, then you know that the model as it stands makes people happy, but does it do the right thing for them? those who have access to power and resources will always get by in whichever form of government. The question is, what does it do to people who do not have a voice? And the test is, can the low middle class or the middle class person walk into the police station hoping that he will come out with his dignity intact and his faith in the justice system intact? If the answer is no, the model speaks for itself. Last question, if any, or are we done? Aaj ki sabha yahin pe? Okay, thank you. So I'll be accused of being anti-diversity. If a lady has a question, please ask a question. Yes, there's a lady waiting, please. Yes.
Good evening, sir. Your speech
Good
is very good. My question was, we are
We planned a panel discussion. This is a last minute preparation, so go on.
we are okay.
Yeah.
We are taught that preamble is basis of constitution.
Or it is the essence of the constitution,
Yes.
the saransh of it.
So
Yes.
we speak that we have secularism, right? Secularism is one
Was
of the,
not there, but is inserted later.
yes, and equality at the same time.
Yes.
Then why do we only charge temples? Like, let's say I donate some gold to the temple.
You're preaching to the choir. I know the question. Yeah.
I've heard that
Hmm.
60% of it goes to the state.
Right.
Should I call this secularism and equality? Should I say
The
that?
question you should be asking is, if two values within the preamble compete with each other, which should prevail? Should equality prevail over secularism, or should secularism prevail over equality? To precisely avoid this kind of a situation or this conundrum, they chose not to use the word secularism in the preamble originally. There were two aspects of Indian constitution that were heavily contested from a cultural perspective. One is the use of the word untouchability in Article 17, where untouchability is abolished. And the second is secularism. I'll tell you what happened on untouchability. They said, in a lot of traditional Hindu households, before somebody decides to do a puja and after they've had a bath, they expect the rest of the family members to not touch them. It's called muddy, or it's called ritualistic purity. The word for that in Sanskrit is shuchi. You don't touch it. That's it. They will say, if you use the word untouchability without context and definition, even this will amount to untouchability, leading to prosecution. That is the extent to which they discussed untouchability in the constitutional debates, to say, use a word with some degree of social context or definition, otherwise it is capable of mischief. The very same principle was applied to secularism, and it was discarded through a conscious choice. The word secular was present, but when secular becomes an ism, it acquires a different character, or it becomes a different beast altogether. Because secular simply means that which is not religious. Secularism is a concept which is fluid, changes from continent to continent and culture to culture. Therefore, they said, don't do it. So the surreptitious insertion of this in 1976 as part of the 42nd Amendment, according to me, is one of the biggest, I would say, catastrophic decisions that has destroyed the possibility of a unified Bharat. And as long as that word remains, since it was never there in the original book, I have and I will continue to take the conscious, clear position, it should be struck off from the preamble completely without any guilt whatsoever. Because if Bharat existed as a peaceful country and as a country that was capable of entertaining plural identities prior to 1976, surely it can do so even after the removal of that word. It's not anybody's case that we were less secular before 1976. I'd like to see people make that case, because then there was a different government in power. So the point I'm trying to make is very simple. One, the presence of that word has allowed people to play mischief with our identity, has told us that the assertion of our civilizational identity comes in the way of constitutional values, and that word is single-handedly responsible for pitting two seas against each other, the constitution on the one hand and the civilization on the other. It has made you choose between the two when both of them can comfortably coexist. It is this word that has actually created that kebab mein haddi. So I'm grateful. Thank you. Grateful.